we live streaming?
Yeah.
Okay, colleagues, we're live streaming now, so welcome to our in-person licensing. I'm very pleased to note that Sajila Nasir is now fully in post and as our new director, so welcome, Sajila. After the usual formalities, notice of recording webcast. I advise the meeting note this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast by the Council's meeting YouTube site, and that members of the press and public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. Declarations of interest. Members remind they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests, etc. Are there any declarations of interest? I take that as none, thank you. You can always declare during an item, of course. And then apologies. Councillor Pritchard has notified us, I think, of his apologies. Yeah. Any other apologies on behalf of the members? No, thank you very much. I should say that Dr. Alex Howard from Clipper Automotive is here. Dr. Howard's not making a presentation, but it's for item 5. Chris Arundel, you're going to talk to the report, I think, Chris, aren't you? Yeah, okay. But Dr. Howard is kindly here to deal with any technical issues. This, of course, is the electric Hackney carriage vehicle conversion report. So thank you very much for that. Okay, minutes of the meeting held on 29th of June 2022. Any corrections to those minutes? If not, I confirm those as correct record. You've got a copy there, all right, I can do that afterwards. Thank you. Okay, so we are actually on to the electric Hackney carriage vehicle conversions report. So, Chris, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Chair. The proposal has been submitted to licence a fully electric conversion for TX type London cabs. This conversion offers a fully electric zero emissions alternative to the hybrid options which are currently available and could offer a new lease of life to older purpose-built Hackney carriage vehicles. The proposal, as attached at Appendix 1 of the report, details the methodology employed in the conversion and amendments to policy which could allow converted vehicles to be licensed and operated in Birmingham. The first request to allow licensing on the strength of an IVA is simply required to confirm the conversion has been completed safely and properly, so should not be problematic, and a breakdown of the remedial work undertaken during the conversion is attached to the report as Appendix 2, which also includes details of pricing. The second request to extend the lifespan of the converted vehicles potentially represents more of an issue, and officers have offered an assessment of the potential pros and cons of amending the policy on age limits at 5.1 to 5.7 in the report. It should be noted that because these vehicles are not brand new replacement vehicles, they are conversions of existing second-hand vehicles, they probably would not qualify for new vehicle replacement grants. But we have spoken to the Clean Air Zone team who have advised that people who did own these vehicles could be eligible to claim up to £10,000 over 4 years for a grant which is designed to cover the running costs of newer, cleaner vehicles. The company proposes to offer the vehicles for rental in the short term, but has ambitions to make the conversion available to drivers and proprietors on a commercial basis. And the commercial viability of the conversion is likely to be affected without amendments to our existing age limits. Officers seek feedback from your committee as part of the process to prepare the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Policy Review that will be carried out later this year. And Dr. Alexander Howard has attended the committee meeting today to discuss the proposal and to answer your questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Well, you've got the report there. If I could just highlight a couple of points, I think the implications for us are really around the age limit. Currently, as you know, we have a 15-year age limit for black cabs. And one of the issues posed in the report, which is really for, not for making a formal recommendation today, but really to get your views, because the conversation needs to be held subsequently with the cabinet member, Councillor Clements, around her view. But we're being consulted, obviously, as this is a regulatory matter ultimately. clearly there are a number of options that we could adopt on age limits. We could suggest we could treat each converted vehicle as a new vehicle effectively and give them another 15 years, but that would mean you would potentially have vehicles running around that were 30 years old. Or of course we could set a lower period, 7 years, with a renewal maybe. Obviously the fact is the black cabs are checked every year anyway through MOT and the rest of it. But a number of issues there that really be useful to get your feedback on. And as the paper says, you're welcome to email officers. You email Emma Rahoman with any view you have about, age limits and the rest of it, then that would be really helpful. But obviously we do have Dr. Howard here if there are any technical questions about the conversion. I think the paper is quite clear on how that works. Anybody want to raise any questions or points about the report?
Chair.
Yep.
Can I just raise one question in terms of the older vehicles? Not all of the older Hackney vehicles are most accessible for people who have mobility problems or disabilities. How is this going to impact if we allow older vehicles and have a new lease of life?
Chair, all our Hackney Carriage vehicles are required to be wheelchair accessible, and it's true that the older TX1 and TX2 type vehicles didn't have built-in ramps. Now, I'm looking at Dr. Howard now, but if my understanding is correct, the intention is to look at converting TX4 vehicles, and the TX4 vehicles did have a built-in ramp. So the problem of having to get auxiliary ramps out of the boot of a vehicle, attach them to the side of the vehicle, and associated with that should be removed because the vehicles concerned will all have a built-in ramp.
Yeah. TX4 vehicles, do they are they manufactured? Have they been manufactured in a certain number of years? Is it possible to say, or does it span decades?
Yeah, so they ended manufacture in 2017, I think, and started in 2002, I think, something like that. So pretty much all of the black cabs that you see around are TX4s. There are a few of the older TX2s and TX1s left, but only a couple, I think, and they might even be gas conversions as well.
Yeah, I think, Chair, if it helps, it is likely that the only TX1s and TX2s that we would have left now, because of the age limit, are likely to be the LPG converted vehicles.
Yeah.
Councillor Locke.
I wanted to also mention that some of the cabs, I don't know what TS whatever they are, but they've got the little step you move to climb in. That can be difficult as well to get into because they're quite high up to climb into, and they've got the little step. And sometimes getting in and out can be difficult. You may not need wheelchair access, but there can be people who may have a stick or something like that, and it can be tricky as well.
Chair, I think it's fair to say that the world is still waiting for a proper, all-encompassing design for Hackney Carriage vehicles. Some of the van der Ride vehicles will have steps, but again, it's my understanding that the van der Ride vehicles aren't currently included in the scope for this conversion. It's only the TX type London cabs.
Thanks. Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Will there be sufficient charging points in the city?
I'm afraid as a licensing officer, I don't have enough information with regard to the current rollout for the charging points.
The interiors be upgraded, will that be part of the...
I believe that is an option, but I'm sure, again, Dr. Howard would like to speak to you with regard to the actual conversions.
Can I answer those?
Dr. Howard here.
Yeah, so for the charging points, on the normal routine that we recommend for drivers was that they charge overnight on a slower charge, and then just top up during the day when they need to on a rapid charge. And the taxi, they only do about 100 miles in a day, so most days they'll be able to do it with one charge anyway. But there are a number of rapid chargers around the city. Are there enough? Probably not. And as the rollout of electric vehicles speeds up, it's going to become more and more of a problem. But yeah, they definitely need somewhere to charge up during the night to make it work.
Councillor Green.
Yeah, Chair. I'm adhering that now to the agreement that we did with the taxi drivers when we introduced the clean air zone. And part of that agreement did give some money made available for charging funds. Has that money been used for what it was intended?
Chair, I don't.
Yeah, we can't. Chris won't know the answer to that because it's really this obviously goes to the transport people, doesn't it? I said, Councillor Dring, this goes to the transport unit, doesn't it, rather than to licensing. What I will do.
It was part of the taxi drivers' agreement that was agreed in this room.
Yeah, I don't know how many taxi drivers have taken up the grant regime, but we know it's still there. What I can do after
everyone at Horse and Jockey.
Idea where that's coming. Anyway, I was just saying that my role here, I think, is to hear what you all say today. So we don't have to make a firm recommendation. We're being asked about the principle of potentially revising our age limits if we go with the technical proposal to allow these electric vehicles. That's what we're being asked to discuss. But my role is to go back to the cabinet member and say, right, have you got your ducks in a line in respect of the other questions members have asked, like charging points and stuff like that, which I will do. Councillor Knowles.
I was just going to ask on the charging point for the drivers that don't have facilities to be able to charge overnight, maybe at their homes. Is there any assistance for them to get that in place?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what support there is for home chargers in Birmingham, but I do know that increasingly sort of cheaper options to enable people to access out from their houses when they don't have off-street parking are becoming available, like gullies in the with a little metal cover that goes in the pavement, or even lamppost chargers that are connected to the tariff on their house, or even if it's an area somewhere nearby where they can plug into a 7 kilowatt council charger, that would be more than adequate.
I think we're in a position to debate the principle today around our own powers, which is, as I say, whether if we feel this is workable, we would in principle change our age limits. But as I said, there are a number of questions we can't answer about the broader policy. What I can do, we could ask the transport unit, presumably, to just provide information to all the committee members around the current status of the low emissions policy and the clean air zone and the support measures that are there for taxi drivers. I think we need that to inform any further comments we make about the general issues about charging and so on. So we'll take that away. But again, comments on the principle of the conversion and age limits or interiors, just making sure that we are.
There's a question about interiors.
Yes.
So, certainly for the first ones that we want to do here, which would be owned by Clipper, we would make sure that the interiors were up to the standard, let's say the London standard for interior black cabs. So just to give you some idea, a full interior refit, including the liners and having it all reupholstered and everything, costs about £600 to £700, which obviously is quite expensive for the drivers to do. But in the context of a brand new, fully functioning electric vehicle, it's not actually so much. So certainly when we do the conversions on the ones that we rent out, we would make sure they were up to a very high standard. when we move on to converting vehicles that are already licensed here in Birmingham and the existing vehicles in Birmingham, we wouldn't do all of them because we would definitely want to inspect them primarily for any degradation on the chassis and the body. Because of the way that we do the conversion, where we separate them, it gives us an opportunity to basically do almost a full restoration of the chassis and the underbody, which is from an engineering point of view, is the weak point of the vehicle, if you like. So we would ensure that if there's any work required on the chassis, we wouldn't touch it. And then, it's only worth doing to ones that are decent cabs anyway. So that there would be if you like, a quality assurance check within the process, before we even start.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No. Okay, I think, as I say, the way we can proceed on this is for me to talk to the Transport Unit and Councillor Clements about the policy and get you further information. But I don't get the feeling that the principle is objectionable from you. I mean, please, if anybody's really opposed to this, say so. So I think what I'd like to propose is that we proceed on the basis that the principle of these conversions is broadly acceptable, and then there'll be a subsequent decision about age limits. So that could come back to you. Obviously, it would have to come back, I think, as a formal decision of the committee, wouldn't it?
It would be. We're going to bring the Hackney Carriage policy review for your views at next committee. So we'll take away what information we've received today and that Emma receives via email, build that into our proposals for the Hackney Carriage policy review, and then at the next committee we'll have another chance to reflect on it. In terms of what we've picked up the members want within that review.
Okay. And in the interim, as I say, we'll get to every committee member a briefing on the clean air zone provisions for support of taxi drivers, including the grant regime, because those are relevant considerations. And just on detail like interiors, it's quite clear that we can specify that, interiors should be upgraded and so on, but it's very useful to hear the likely cost of that, which, relatively manageable, particularly if somebody's getting a grant. Okay, so... what you mean? Okay. Yeah. We note the recommendation. We note the paper and support the principle of conversion. With further matters coming back to the committee around the Hackney Carriage review. Is that agreed? Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Howard and Chris, for your attendance today. Okay, next item is the Public Space Protection Order fees, and that's Mark Croxford.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone. This report is an addendum to the fees and charges report, which we have to bring annually to review all our fees and charges. As committee will be aware, we have a number of public spaces protection orders, particularly around dog fouling, control of dogs in parks, but also we've now got a public space protection order to deal with amplified music and other use of amplification on the streets in the city in 2 areas. And one of the things we have identified is in the last committee, we didn't bring a report asking to set that tariff and review that tariff. So at the moment, it has been set at maximum, which is what we do with all of our tariffs for fixed penalties. So this report is just asking for a decision, and then we'll include it in the future fixed penalties, the future fees and charges reports, that we set the public space protection order FPN value at £100. That is the maximum. There can be recommend that as officers because a lot of people pay the early amount even very late and after the date, and it causes quite a lot of problems and on refunding monies where enforcement is being undertaken. And I would also just confirm that I have spoke to the community safety team, Pam Harris's team, about this report, and she's happy with the recommendation. It is a request for a decision by the committee to formally review it and make a decision on the tariff for chair.
Comments? To go with the recommendation? Okay, that's seconded. Thank you very much. That is agreed. Thank you. Okay, so we're on to the Prosecution and Cautions report, which, as you know, is the usual information report, which speaks for itself. Again, if you've any questions about particular cases, be useful to talk to the relevant officers, really, but the information is all there in the public arena as well. Any comments on any of the information or questions? Yes, Cass Kuna.
Just want to say, we obviously that we get some enforcement and finding against people that are breaking the laws, etc. I think it's really useful to be able to share with the public, and it's also act as
Deterrent.
Deterrent for local residents. If we can share like the number of fines and things that we've had, especially like specifically if you've got fines in certain areas, like for example, I've seen on some of the fines, there is fines in my ward. I would love to know if this is a fine in my ward, because then that will deter other people to say, well, actually, council, there's been a fine of this amount for and if we've got all that information out there in the public domain, maybe share it with the local council of that particular ward. I think it might, this, because it will deter people. So I'm proactive in terms of sharing information, maybe people will hesitate in terms of licensing, because if it's becoming an increasing problem throughout the city, and obviously as council, we're regularly got enforcement, it's really just need to involve. I've had a meeting with employees, when I was one of the leaders, and we talked about enforcement to the level of evidence we need when trying to prosecute someone. So I think it's useful to have something with local residents and also, some prosecution we've had, that sort of thing.
Yeah, what we could do is either circulate this report to all local councillors following, or alternatively we could ask for a digest of the report to be circulated to councillors, and then contact details if further information is coming. Previously, we have been asked not to do all councillors in circulars, but if that's a request, I think it would have to be a decision by the committee chair.
Yeah, well, clearly colleagues are very interested in activity in their own wards, because that, of course, sends a message. And I know we do publicise particularly egregious cases, don't we?
Try to.
Yeah, try to get those in the media. Obviously, we're in the hands of the media and social media and so on. But clearly, if colleagues want to, I mean, we see the reports, obviously. If you're on the committee, you see the report and you can pick the information about your own ward. But we could see if other colleagues would like to receive those reports. It's probably something I need to take away. And
we can filter it by, because the ward is there.
Yeah.
We could filter it by the ward and send it to the ward councillors of the respective wards, or alternatively, we could do a circular for all councillors. It's really that.
Yeah, I think it's probably sending it to the wards affected, isn't it, really? Because that's what we'd be most interested in. So if it's possible to filter it by ward and then notify those ward councillors that this has happened, because colleagues who are not on the committee might not clock it, although, again, the worst cases are well publicised.
Yeah.
But even a small case might be of some use in terms of our local publicity, trying to promote people to report fly tipping and the rest of that. So would that be,
Yeah, through you, Chair. We'll have a look at how best to lay it out, because it could be about where the offence has been committed or where the offender lives. So there's a lot of vagaries within the actual prosecution itself. So we just need to find the best layout to share the information, or whether we share both sets of information, but we need to go away and think how best to do it.
okay,
Also, I mean, we could come like headlines saying like, £50,000 worth of fines for environmental health cases, it's a headline things, just quite big figures. Those are accidents, terrorists for people, but I'll leave you guys to think of how you want to try to do that.
yeah, we do publicise the big cases, don't we? Because obviously there's public interest, isn't there, media interest.
A lot of them are on with Birmingham Live. We get it every day, and sometimes there are cases that we can, about licences that have been granted, or environmental health issues and things like that, or a fly tipping fine as well.
We can bring back to the next meeting the suggestion how we publicise these, but I think the principle we'll establish here is that it's the ward members of a particularly affected ward, really. So selectively doing that, really, yeah.
And Chair,
Councillor Forsyth.
It's where the offence is committed. It doesn't really matter where the offender lives, it's where the offence is committed. It'll be more relevant to all ward councillors.
Yeah, I think that's true. Councillor Islam?
Oh, thank you. Sorry, may not be relevant to this item. The reason I'm asking, because many of my constituents, they have seen the culprit, those who are, dropping fly tipping. They have taken the photographs, and the officer said, will you be able to give a statement? Or if there is a necessary, you have to go to the court. So most of the cases, the residents are reluctant to give a statement because they are a bit frightened of the culprit. In this situation, what can the the enforcement department can do to prosecute these people? Although there is some photographs taken, you can clearly see the person who has done it, but without any evidence from a particular person, is there any other alternative way to prosecute these people? Thank you.
Through you, Chair, it's an increasing problem that we are experiencing. So people who suffer noise nuisance, etc., are also finding it sometimes very difficult to agree to come to court. Where the offence is a strict offence, and I sort of align it with a speeding offence, if you're doing 40 and a 30, you've automatically committed the offence. They're relatively easy for us to prosecute. Where the offence is because something's happened to somebody, so somebody's suffering a nuisance, there is nothing we can do if people don't wish to go to court and actually give their evidence, because although we can support them and say it was noisy enough to be a nuisance, they've got to also prove that they were there, that they were suffering it, how it affected their life. We can't evidence that side of it. I think Martin Smith, when he was with us, he worked very, very strongly around trying to do the enforcement through fly tippers without trying to bring people through. And we've tried to do the best we can, but there are a number of offences where the person needs to make the complaint. And sometimes it's just a statement because it's accepted. But if it goes to trial, they would have to go to court. There's nothing we can do to go around the legislation, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, anybody? Yes, Councillor Knowles.
I've got a question about the prosecutions of penalties for littering, and the fact that so many of them are in latent wards. I'm presuming in the city centre. I'm presuming they're probably, going from my past experience, cigarette ends in front. But I've noticed, for instance, in my ward, there were only, I'm not sure there were any, at the most 3. Why is it that they're concentrated so much on the city centre and not in the other local towns and villages?
We've got a new contractor that's come with us, and one of the things we are pushing very heavily with them is much more patrols in the outer area. And I will look at trying to increase the amount of information on that side, on the littering offences. But they are doing more patrols. The fact of the matter still comes down to it's about how much you can see and how many people are likely to be littering. So if you've got 10 people, the chances of anybody littering in that 10 is pretty remote. If you've got 1,000 people, you've probably got 1 or 2 people who are going to litter, and then it's a case of whether you actually sit and commit the offence. So if you can imagine standing in a high street where you can only look down the high street, if everybody's between you and the person that's littered, you don't even see the offence. And it has to be, I saw them drop it and leave it. It's more than I found the litter and I know it came from you because I saw you holding it previously. It can't be that, it has to be. So part of it is actually the sheer number of people that they encounter, so a percentage thing. But I will get you a report because we have asked specifically with this contractor that they give us a report on the wards and the areas where they work. And then they're supposed to have a GPS system that actually shows the hours they're working in those wards. So that would help answer that question.
Helpful, because as well as we want to send a message, people don't stop this, you're going to get caught. Then they think, well, it's only in the city centre. Then, you know, it's not sending that message really, is it? So, yeah.
No, but it's...
And the amount of litter we pick up, our litter picking groups, shows that there are people dropping it.
But again, if you come to me with your hotspots,
yeah.
I'm more than happy to commit the patrols to the hotspots. We can't if a site hasn't been cleaned for a year, for example, and obviously there's a build-up, there's nothing we can do about the build-up. But if there's active littering, so we do activity around shopping centres where people say the late night takeaways or something, a particular problem, then we will put a late night patrol on, etc. So if we can identify hotspots, if we can identify roughly when it occurs, we have flexibility there to try and interact. So please just continue those.
Lock.
And also the number of us work with local residents and litter picking groups and things like that. One thing that gets on my nerves is the masks, because some people, you know, still prefer maybe one of them to wear a mask on buses and things like that. No, it's not, you know, the regulations have stopped, but you know, some people will still, for various reasons, still continue to wear masks. And also people just throwing bottles out of cars as they're driving. And that really annoys me. I wish we could have stingers or something to stop them sometimes. They really are annoying.
Councillor
I've got it on my chest now, sorry.
Yeah, just to echo what colleagues have said, we go out and do the picks all the time in Franklin, in particular around the Great Park at the back of Morrison's. And so in terms of prosecutions, what do we do when it comes to school children? Because back on Morrison's, it's a footpath that kids use to get from Franklin to Colmer School. And so they'll go to Morrison's, they'll buy loads of sweets, packaging, and as they're walking through the woodland, that's when they drop it. So I suppose you could probably bleed into education there a little bit as well. But that is a massive hotspot. We go down there with the Ruby Wombles and do a litter pick there every 6 months. And it just comes back over and over and over again. So that's probably something I'll touch base with you offline about. Maybe it's time to actually do something. We also thought about speaking to. Here's one for you actually. You might be able to answer query here. We wanted to speak to the local businesses about potentially getting businesses to come together and create a pot of money to fund bins. I spoke to the Parks Department about this, and what my idea was that the bins could actually have some kind of sponsorship on them. So this bin was provided by Frankie and Benny's or Hollywood Bowl, the cinema. The cinema is another great hotspot. You've got a bus stop because the 49 now goes down to Great Park, and right by the bus stop outside the cinema, you've got all the popcorn, the drinks, and it's all come from the cinema. That's where it's come from. How would we get? Because I believe that there's a bit of I'm not sure if it's something to do with licensing. How would we be able to get approval for some kind of branding or sponsorship on a bin to incentivise local businesses to pay for local bins in the area rather than having to use the budgets that we always keep saying are a cash straps you don't actually have the funding for?
Chair, it is a good question, and I don't know. I'll have to speak to Darren Chair around that side. I do recall some years ago that the actual provision of the bins wasn't the problem. That it was the servicing of the bins, because it's the on cost of having the bins. Because I remember there were a lot of bins put out under the NRF days, if you can recall those. So I think I will need to take that question to Darren and ask him how that can be dealt with. But it is a good question. And again, the issue around the bus stop and the cinema, etc., that's exactly the sort of intelligence we need, and we will put patrols onto that.
Yeah, just again to come back on that, because I think it is a good initiative if you were able to get businesses to cough up for and also for the maintenance potentially. But they obviously would need to get something out of that. Because, you know, Great Park, it used to be a thriving area once upon a time, you know, the cinema and the bowling, and it's just, we were sick and tired of going around there and doing litter picks, and there's no bins. And it's something that we're running a campaign to get to do. But if we could get the businesses to be involved in that, that could potentially be a catalyst for councillors to use in other parts of the city. So I would like to sit there and I would like to try and talk to you offline about how we can get that. I do believe there's some kind of technicality around putting business branding on a council bin, you know, so we just need to kind of iron out that and figure out how we can actually do something moving forward.
I think it's a very interesting debate, this, and I take the point that the problem is servicing the additional bins. But that doesn't mean it's not a good idea. I suppose the issue is whether you could get businesses, say the people who run the cinema, to take responsibility for the littering immediately outside. I know some fast food outlets do a tidy up, don't they? I think some McDonald's do. So in a sense, it's about encouraging that, isn't it? You know your wards best, you know who you can approach. But I think the problem is if we get additional bins, then the issue is, are we going to see those, serviced? I think if you've got an active voluntary group, we've got Bilsby bin baggers who are very, very effective in our area. And I can see the point that if we could create more bins for them to use, that then the council will obviously empty in the usual way. That could be beneficial.
There's no excuse then. I mean, there are no bins at the moment. So if you're going to try and prosecute people are just going to say, well, you can walk all the way around Great Park and there's no bins. And right by the bus stop is a perfect location to put one.
Just on that point of the bench, there is no excuse for littering. We were all taught when we were young to put it in our pocket and take it home.
But yeah, exactly.
I'm going to litter. You can always take something that you can put it in a bag. I'm not
excusing the behaviour, but it's like when there are, I get frustrated when I walk down the road and I don't see a bin and you've got to put it in your bag. I mean, that's what I do, but it's kind of like we're saying, creating the deterrents and creating those incentives so that people don't litter. And if we can get business involved in doing that, because the litter is coming from the local businesses, and I'm sure if we go and speak to them, they'll hold their hands up and say yes. But they're going to want us as a council to work with them, and if they're willing to cough up a bit of money, we shouldn't be straight some kind of avenue of making that work.
Yeah. Councillor Knowles.
Maybe take some advice from the business improvement districts, because some of them have their own bins, and the Broad Street, I've got one called now. Bin. The bin.
Southside bin.
Southside bin.
Yeah, they've got bins in brilliant place, which they service themselves. Yeah. And obviously retail bin, we've even got people out picking. So I'm sure, it can be done. Absolutely. It's just getting the businesses together and being able to put it in place.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I'm not saying this to say we shouldn't do it. I think it's a great idea. I think we need to find the practicalities to make sure it can be delivered. But we shouldn't have areas where there is absolutely no bins unless there's a really good reason.
Can you come back to us on Mark, on some of those issues with some more thoughts about how we might facilitate that, obviously working with Fleet and Waste. I take the point about the bids. Obviously, a lot of areas are never going to get bids, though. My area is unlikely to see a bid, so that is the problem. But clearly it works very well where you've got that additional resource from the bid. Councillor Cooner.
Yes, I just want to get one is really about the whole, not a particular case, but an understanding of noise nuisance. So as you're aware, I recently been educated of 3 or 4 parts on small road where families are living, and they were going into this temporary accommodation, which I've been told is been administered by the council, and of course in noise nuisance, which is one of the issues that I raised of that, in addition to many others. And I was told that's not the remit of the Environment and Health Department. But so noise nuisance is a remit of the Environment and Health Department. So I was told that this is now, forwarded on to the community safety partnership. So what areas of noise nuisance fall under environmental health, and what areas would then be under the remit of the community safety partnership? Just to get an understanding, really.
I'll check on the specifics of the case that you've referred to, but in general, the noise has to, for it to be a nuisance, it has to affect somebody and arise from normally premises, okay? And it has to affect you where you live. So you can't walk, for example, you can't walk down outside a chip shop and say, I don't like the smell of the fish and chips, because you happen to not. That wouldn't be a nuisance. If you live next to it and it was affecting you, potentially you could make a complaint. The other thing with noise is that it has to arise from something which is controllable. Okay, so if it's stereo or amplification equipment, TV's been played at excessive noise levels, that sort of thing, then that would fall into the statutory noise definitions that we looked at to see whether it was a problem. However, if it's from things like children playing, shouting, arguing, it falls outside of noise nuisance, the Environment Protection Act. But since 2003, it falls into the antisocial behaviour side. So without knowing the absolute specifics, I can't answer, but we will come back to you. So it could be about where it's arising. Is it arising from premises and affecting another premises, or is it on the street? And is it antisocial behaviour noise rather than amplification and that type of noise? So those are the sort of the broad headlines on the question you've asked.
So it's arising from this really temporary encampment with 3 or 4 camper vans parked on the road.
Mm-hmm.
They've obviously got friends in one of the houses on the road. So they all in the daytime go and get together and make all bomb the country. So antisocial behaviour then, does that not fall within the remit of the council? Is that definitely in the remit of the police and not?
So, Chair, the Antisocial Behaviour Act is dealt with by both the police and the local authority. The antisocial behaviour sat with housing, because it used to be with the housing function as well as the BASBO function. And what's happening at the moment is the community safety team are recruiting new antisocial behaviour officers to actually deal with this, because we've had a lack of officers who are actually liaising antisocial behaviour cases. So no, it's not. Although we do try and use it for our work, it wasn't predominantly anything to do with environmental health. It used to be BASBO in the housing department. So there is a recruitment drive, I believe, through Pam's team for further, I think it was 12 antisocial behaviour officers they're recruiting. So they're trying to minimise that gap in service. But I will come back to you on the specifics of it.
Thank you. There are a number of community safety partnerships, aren't there, which are LPDGs, I think they're called. I sit on the Selly Oak one. How many other members here sit on their local?
I've asked to.
Right.
I did sit on, but
Yeah.
what happened is, so it was called Perry District, but the people were not focusing on my ward, and they're focusing on other wards. So I was thinking, well, if they're putting on there, so focus on my ward.
I mean, I know there's a nomination process, and I think there are 3 councillors. Councillor Locke, I think you're on the Selly Oak one as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. There are 3 councillors from the wider constituency. So I don't know whether that's going to be reviewed, but I mean, it's worth just following that up through your group structures, see what the possibilities are, because it just means there's a useful link there. You can raise issues like this in that context. I find that's quite helpful. Okay, yes.
Sorry, could I just ask, have you got any plans to introduce these vehicle noise monitor
Chair, there was surprisingly, there was a thing that came out from government and comes through an MP asked whether we wish to enter into a trial for noise cameras, which I've never come across. Obviously, we have noise sound recording equipment, and you have cameras to view things, and it's a bit of a surprise that they put it together. So we were approached by an MP. We did submit an application to be part of the trial, but we haven't had anything back on that trial. I don't know the current events and the pressures, not necessarily just the very recent ones that have changed anything. But we were hoping to be part of the trial. And to give you an idea what it was to do, it was to actually film vehicles on the road that had been modified to a point where they caused a disturbance, and it had to be done in conjunction with the police. So because we've got noise experts or technical experts, what we were hoping to do was support the people that were going to put the cameras up. We'd spoken to Highways about using their facilities, the lampposts, etc., and we spoke to the local police, who were really excited by it. But at the moment, we haven't been contacted about it. But if you do hear anything, or there's something I'm missing, I would love to know about that one, because the police were very keen on it. And it was the police that were dealing with injunctions, partners and injunctions, and their the superintendent, who's the chief inspector, he was really keen. So if you do hear anything from it,
we're still waiting for word back on that one. Yeah.
What we can do is, we've written to them and shown interest, just pursue it up. So
we'll go back to that.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll check with DEFRA then, yeah. Okay, colleagues. Well, that's your prosecution's report. If we could note the report. Agreed, thank you. And then, as you know, the second report is the overview of regulation enforcement, so the whole span of activities which the director can answer questions to. Is there anything anybody wants to raise on this? Again, it speaks for itself, but you have the whole range here of what we cover. Oh, I should mention actually on page 9, the ACG award, the anti-counterfeiting group. One of our officers, Mr. Mohammed Tariq, a senior training standards officer, has won the highly recommended Dave Hankinson Memorial Award for individual excellence in recognition of his specific contributions to anti-counterfeiting enforcement work during 2021-22. I think it'd be good for the committee to note that and record our thanks to the officer concerned, and indeed the team of officers who are active on, obviously, anti-counterfeiting work on goods and services. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Anything else that you want to cover? Can we accept the report? Agreed? Agreed, thank you. Right, item 9. These are actions taken by me as chair, which are usually around emergency interventions on taxi licences and so on. That report speaks for itself. But I'll take the opportunity to just introduce some information which the director is going to speak to. And you may have seen on the information feed, the News Digest, the decision to support our application as the council to the government for a selective licensing scheme around housing, around landlord licensing. And Sir Julian Nasir has been central to this process, and we're at the very beginning of the process, aren't we? So there isn't any paper to present, but matters will come to the committee in the future. But Julian, would you just like to say what's happening?
Yes, we're really pleased to announce that government, through the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, have approved our application for a selective licensing scheme for private rented sector properties in Birmingham, covering 25 wards where we have high levels of private rented sector deprivation and or crime. We've agreed with government a start date for that licensing scheme, and that will be the 5th of June 2023. The licensing scheme will cover 40 to 50,000 properties. It will be the largest in England. And obviously what we're trying to do is that by virtue of the scheme and the requirement for properties to be licensed, that we're seeking to improve standards within the sector, to enable tenants to have more secure and stable accommodation, which in turn will reduce crime and deprivation, while increasing their life chances and having a more vibrant and stable neighbourhood and community. So those are the aims of the scheme. Whilst the decision to pursue the scheme was a cabinet decision, Obviously, LPPC will have a very important role in monitoring the outcomes of the scheme, particularly in setting the licence fee, which is proposed at £700 over 5 years, and also the compliance and enforcement of the scheme through the 130 new staff that we will be recruiting to deliver the scheme. I know that when we did the consultation for selective licensing, a lot of people through the consultation asked if their wards could be included. That was not possible because of the evidential tests that were required to pursue selective licensing, which were deprivation, crime and levels of private rented sector that the city put forward. But we have consulted on additional licensing, and additional licensing, a citywide scheme, is that all houses in multiple occupation with occupants 3 or 4 would require a licence for those premises. We also have a mandatory licence scheme, which is mandatory for houses in multiple occupation where we have 5 or more occupants. The additional licensing scheme, the consultation ceased on the 13th of September. We're now compiling the feedback we've had through that consultation scheme and hope to bring a cabinet report either to December or January for consideration. A citywide additional licensing scheme, that decision would be made by cabinet as opposed to the selective licensing scheme, which was, because of the size of it, I had to go to government. So I think we've looked at the entirety of private rented sector and what we can do to facilitate change within that tenure, but more widely in terms of supporting our neighbourhoods within Birmingham. So I think, it's obviously a piece of very good news for Birmingham. We are communicating it more widely yesterday and today, and obviously it's reaching quite a lot of media outlets right at this moment. So you may well see it in publications and online. So thank you, and hope for your continuing support as we progress towards full implementation over the next 9 months.
I thought you ought to hear that information in some detail, as although it's a long way off in terms of actually the scheme moving, the government-approved scheme. The reports from that, the actual regulation reports, were coming here, weren't they? So it obviously comes within our purview, and but the policy matters, of course, rest with the cabinet member in the usual way. It's a significant step forward, I think. And I'm pleased to be reminded about the additional licensing scheme, because I think that answers one of the questions that colleagues have said to me: what about the rest of the city? Because obviously the danger is you have the main scheme in those 25 wards, and then there's an issue of knock-on in wards like my own and elsewhere. Any questions or comments? Okay, I take that as a welcome for the progress we're making, and obviously the committee will be kept closely in touch with that, so thank you very much. But Councillor Thompson obviously has the policy information if you want to seek out more of that. Okay, item 9 is noted, Chair's Authority Report, of course. Right, well, we're on to date and time of the next meeting. The next meeting will actually be an online briefing, so we can pick up some of the issues we've discussed here in more detail, and that will be on October the 26th at 10:30. And then with the next in-person meeting, I think, is November the 16th. I've got the dates right there. No other urgent business has been notified to me. So I shall move on to item 12 and move that in an urgent situation between meetings, the chair jointly with the relevant chief officer has authority to act on behalf of the committee. Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay, that is the business today, colleagues. So thank you very much for your attendance, and I close the meeting.